Hi guys, Andrew's here with a new video. Today I'm going to walk you through something special. How to change the front brakes on a Porsche Cayman, that is including both the brake pads and rotors. Many European cars share the same, if not similar designs in their brake systems since they use Brembo calipers. Therefore, you may also twist the steps in this video a little and apply them to cars other than a Porsche. I highly recommend that you have this video with you and use it as a guideline when you perform your own brake job. Before we start, we need a sturdy low-profile jack so we can fit it under this low car. We of course need to have our brake pads and rotors ready, as well as new brake sensors. I recommend using the new ones as they can reflect brake wear more accurately. To keep our hands clean, we need some gloves, an impact adapter set in my case, one 10mm socket, one 10mm hex driver. You may also want to have a T55 star bit, as some Caymans and Boxsters don't have hex caliper bolts. A 19mm lug nut socket is required, and a leftover turkey blaster from Thanksgiving will come in handy. On the tool side, we need a torque wrench, a breaker bar, a rubber mallet, a needle nose plier, a regular hammer, some screwdrivers, and a brake pad separator. Lastly, you may also want a brake caliper hanger set, some thread locker, some 5 or 6mm metal sticks, disc brake quiet, and some metal brushes for cleaning purposes. If you don't have all the tools, I recommend that you check out your local auto parts stores. They may be able to rent you some free of charge. First, get your gloves on, make sure the car is off, pull the handbrake, and open the front lid. Next up, we're going to suck out some brake fluid. The reason is when we switch out the brake pads, we will push the piston back and thus push the brake fluid back. If we don't suck out some fluid beforehand, it may spill out from the tank and make a mess. Prepare some paper towels so you don't contaminate the car. Prepare a little container to store the brake fluid, and with our turkey blaster, suck up some brake fluid and inject them in the container. You want to suck up as much fluid as you can. Next, place the jack under the car. The jacking point on a Porsche Cayman is not this rounded thing with a hole. This is for the jack stand and regular scissor jacks. You want to place your jack under this solid structure. It is strong enough to hold the weight for this car. Before we jack the car up, we want to loosen the wheel lug bolts. Remember not to remove them. This will make removing the wheel easier, since after the car is jacked up, the wheels will rotate and make removing the lugs more difficult. Jack the car up nicely and steadily. Then remove all the wheel lug bolts and take the wheel off. Now let's look at the brake. It is held together by a metal rod that goes through the caliper and brake pads. A metal pin is stuck in the rod to prevent it from moving. Therefore, let's first pull the pin out with our needle nose plier. And then, with a metal hammer and a 5mm metal stick, let's punch the rod out. Again, bit by bit, and take your time. After the rod is pushed out, we can see that the brake sensor wires are attached to the brake pads, and the whole thing is held by the thin metal bracket. This bracket is like a spring and has a constant tension, so be a little careful. Now, with a needle nose plier, climb onto the brake sensors and pull them out. Wiggle them around and pull slowly. And once finished, the whole clip will be released. Trace the sensor wire toward the top. We will see that the sensor is plugged into this plastic tube outlet. With a flathead screwdriver, gently pry the cover up to gain full access to the plugs. And we will pull the left wire out. Yes, only the left wire needs to be unplugged. Now the brake sensors should be detached, but not quite. Trace the wire toward the brake caliper. We can see that it is held by a rubber loop, and to release that, we will have to remove the rubber cap on the caliper. Use whatever tool you want. I'm sticking with the flathead screwdriver, and so long I don't damage it. Take the cap off. Now the brake sensors can be easily removed. Next up, we can see that the brake pads are stuck in their places and won't fall out. This is because the pistons have been pushing the brake pads, and over time the pads get closer to the rotor as the rotor wears off. To get the brake pads out, we will use the brake pad separator tool. Simply hold it in place between the two brake pads. Keep twisting the handle to widen the gap. Before you know it, the brake pads are pushed back and can be easily taken out. This is why we must suck out some brake fluid previously, because pushing the pistons back also pushed the fluid back to the reservoir. But we aren't done yet. There are two little pads between the brake pads and the pistons. We can pry them out with a flathead screwdriver. As you can see, they have two cylinder feet that fit into the piston holes. Remove both of them from the caliper. Next up, we will unscrew the little screw that holds the caliper bracket in place. It is quite hidden, and it is this little flat hex screw behind the rubber cap from the earlier step. It is a silver screw, and it's probably made of nickel. I'm not sure, but it is certainly a softer metal. With patience and a 10mm socket, unscrew it and take it out. Don't lose the washer. Now let's move on to the caliper. I found that my car had the newer T55 star bolt, and just to be clear, some Caymans or Boxsters still have the older 10mm hex bolt, therefore having both will be helpful. With a breaker bar and a T55 star bit driver, loosen the bolt, but do not remove them just yet. They are the only thing that hold the caliper in place now. If we remove the bolts right away, the caliper will fall and damage the wires with its weight. Therefore, we will use our caliper hanger set and hook the caliper to somewhere solid. In my case, I had it hooked through a hole and hang onto the suspension. Now we can safely remove the caliper bolts completely and then carefully take the caliper off. And here is the brake rotor all exposed in front of you. It is held by two little screws around its center. Use a suitable screwdriver to remove both screws. Be careful, you don't want to strip them. And if it is too tight, you may want to use an impact driver instead. Once both screws are removed, you should keep them if they are still in good shape. Some rotors also came with new screws. In that case, you should still keep the old screws just in case, but use the new screws, of course. Because this is an old rotor, it is still quite stuck and tight in place. Therefore, we can use a rubber mallet to tap it loose. Do not hit hard, you don't want to break anything. After it is loosened, we can remove it with our hands easily. Before we put our new rotor on, I recommend using a metal brush to give this axle a nice clean. This is to eliminate as much brake dust and dirt accumulated over time. A cleaner part is a better part. Now our star of the show is here, a beautiful brand new brake rotor. Oh, this thing is heavy. All we need to do is to locate the two screw holes on the axle and line them with the screw holes on our brake rotor. Press the new rotor in place and fasten the screws either from the previous step or use new ones if they came with the rotor. Next, install the piston pads back into the caliper and put the caliper back in its proximity. It is highly recommended that you use new caliper bolts to install the caliper back on. However, in my case, those bolts are relatively new. So what I did was to apply some thread locker so that they will be tight. This step is optional, just my personal act. Remember the brake caliper hangers from earlier? It is time to remove them. Now a simple step. Hold the caliper in place with one hand and use the other to twist the bolts in. Once both bolts are in, we can use a brake bar or torque wrench to fasten it. Set your torque wrench to 63 pound-feet or 85.4 Newton-meter and lock it for safety. Tighten the bolts until you hear a click like this. Next, let's install our new brake pads. Before we put them in, we will apply some disc brake quiet to prevent future brake squeal. And then we can put the 2 brake pads back into the caliper. They should slide in easily and fit perfectly. With both brake pads in, it is time to plug in our new brake sensor wires. Pay attention to which wire I'm plugging in. You probably want to clip the red wire back onto the bracket like I do. If you plug in the wires first and forgot about the bracket, it might be a pain to fit it behind the red wire. The red wire only goes into the hole on the outer brake pad, while the black wire and the red wire together goes into the hole on the inner brake pad. And then make sure the black wire goes through the rubber loop. And let's put the rubber cap back onto the caliper. After this is done, plug in the brake sensor and put the cover back on. Remember I said earlier that the metal bracket had a constant pressure? Yes, this little guy is very hard to press in. Therefore, we can use a metal stick to hold it in place while pushing the big rod from the back. Make sure that the little hole on the metal rod is not concealed, as we still need to put the little pin back in. Once we secure the metal rod, we can hit it with a hammer to push it through the caliper. Don't forget its little pin. Let's stick it back into the metal rod. And now let's put the caliper bracket screw back in with the washer. Do not tighten it too much, as it is a softer metal and can easily strip. We're almost there. Hold your breath and put the wheel back on. Use the 19mm lock socket and fasten the wheel lock bolts. Don't tighten them just yet. We just need the wheel to be sort of secured in place. Now we're ready to lower the car. The car jack is probably really tight now. No sudden movement. Just grab onto it and slowly loosen the jack and lower the car. Set your torque wrench to 96 pound-feet or 130 Newton-meters. In a star pattern, tighten every single wheel lock bolt until you hear a nice click like this. We must now switch the car on and... no warning light. Awesome. Push the brake pedal a couple times to get the pistons moving and brake fluid flowing back in. Come to the front of the car and inject the brake fluid back into the reservoir. You may want to bleed and flush the brake fluid, but I don't think it is completely necessary. And there are many videos on YouTube that teach you how to do that. If you successfully reach this step, congratulations! You have done the whole thing yourself, saved hundreds of dollars, and achieved something new in life. Wait a second, we are responsible citizens, so we must also clean up all the trash and mess we made throughout the process. Protect the environment is definitely something we're absolutely responsible for. And finally, go for a little drive to test the new brakes out. This is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found it useful, I recommend that you keep it by you when doing the brake job as reference. Give a thumbs up, comment, and share with friends who may need it. Subscribe to my channel for more videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and I will be seeing you in the next video.